Mindfulness and meditation have been around for decades. What's different about how we practice it now in sort of modern Western life is that it's become a bit more secularized, and there's been a huge amount of scientific research gone into understanding how it works and its impact on our brain and our body. Neuroscientists have been able to establish the theory of neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain is an organ of experience, constantly evolving and reshaping itself. Let's say you want to learn how to juggle. You have to do the same motions of throwing and catching over and over again until those routines become totally automatic. It turns out while you're doing that, there are new neurons growing in your motor cortex, and there are new connections growing between existing neurons in the cortex. There's a really cool study showing that London cab drivers have larger hippocampus than the average person. London is a large and complex city, and those cabbies need to know it like the backs of their hands. The hippocampus is a structure that stores spatial maps, so the cabbies are constantly calling on their mental maps to navigate the city, and their hippocampus gets bigger as a result. About 15 years ago, a bunch of Tibetan monks were flown from the east to a brain imaging lab in Wisconsin. There were some really cool studies done there showing that their brains were actually working completely differently from the brains of the average American citizen. And what they've been able to show subsequently is that it's not just their unusual lifestyles, living in the jungle or not having a mortgage or a car, that is responsible for the changes in their brains. It's actually the thousands of hours that they put into actually practicing. Research has been able to show that you don't necessarily need thousands of hours of practice to achieve those benefits. Ordinary people who practice every day can enjoy some of the benefits. There are some changes in the brain that have been recorded with neuroimaging of ordinary people. So for example, the amygdala, which is a brain structure that processes fear and anxiety, has actually been shown to shrink. The frontal lobes that process decision-making and thinking and planning actually thicken. And the insula, which is a structure that is responsible for self-awareness, actually grows as well. The benefits of mindfulness also show up in other aspects of our biology and physiology. It can improve the effectiveness of the immune system. It can significantly reduce cortisol, a stress hormone. And mindfulness has been shown to promote healing and reduce inflammation in the body. One of the first things you realize when you start training in mindfulness is how mindless we tend to be. In fact, one study from a group at Harvard was able to demonstrate that our minds wander away from the present moment about 50% of the time. That means we're not fully present in our lives about half of the time. Mind wandering appears to be the default state of our brains. The network that switches on when our minds wander off is called the default mode network because it switches on when we're not engaged in any particular task. The encouraging news is that mindfulness training diminishes activation in this network, corroborating the common report that people feel more focused and present when they start training. The improved capacity for focus sets the foundation for a variety of higher level benefits, identified in both research and direct experience. People who practice mindfulness tend to get less carried away in worries and ruminations, which bolsters their mood and resilience. They tend to have a greater capacity for insight and innovation because they're less caught up in well-worn ways of thinking. They tend to be less prone to bad habits because they have better impulse control. And they tend to have richer, more meaningful relationships because they're more present and compassionate with others. The focus that mindfulness affords also makes people more productive at work. Mindfulness really helps people disarm a really nasty habit that many of us engage in at work all the time. It's called multitasking. It's incredibly problematic because ultimately multitasking is an illusion. While we think we're paying attention to several things at once, our brains are actually switching back and forth from task to task. And that switching has a serious cost. Number one, it takes time to sort of catch up to where you were before you switched away from that task. So it takes longer. We tend to make more mistakes. It's much more depleting of our mental energies, and so we get tired faster. And finally, it creates a more stressful and more fragmented work experience. Ultimately, mindfulness is about developing a greater sense of self, greater self-awareness. And when we realize just how much we're on automatic pilot, and we start to become more discerning of the consequences of being on automatic pilot all the time. And once we have that self-awareness, it creates an opportunity to act and think in ways that are more in line with our most important priorities and our deepest values.